Sarah Mitchell found herself lingering in her fourth-grade classroom, well past dismissal time, the February chill seeping through the windows of Pinecrest Elementary as darkness fell early outside. Most days, she'd be halfway home by now, but something had been bothering her about Ethan Rodriguez, the quiet, intelligent boy who had started dozing off during lessons this past week. Ethan had always been a model student, attentive, thorough with assignments, and possessed of a maturity that seemed beyond his 9 years. The sudden change was concerning enough that she'd asked him to stay after class, though he now sat silently at his desk, fidgeting with the fraying edges of his too small winter coat. "Ethan," Sarah said gently, pulling a chair to sit across from him rather than behind her desk, "you fell asleep again during math today. That's the third time this week. Is everything okay at home?" The boy's eyes, dark circles prominent beneath them, remained fixed on his desk. "I'm sorry, Ms. Mitchell, I'm just tired. I'll try harder tomorrow." Sarah had been teaching long enough to recognize the practiced response of a child hiding something. "You're not in trouble," she assured him. "I'm just concerned. You've always been one of my most focused students. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." A silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of the janitor's vacuum in the hallway. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice barely audible. "Do you ever have nightmares, Ms. Mitchell? Ones that follow you even when you're awake?" The unexpected question caught Sarah off guard. "Sometimes," she answered honestly. "Everyone has bad dreams now and then." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I used to have them about monsters. Now I have them about freezing." Something in his tone made Sarah's teacher instincts flare with concern. "Freezing? What do you mean?" Ethan's small fingers continued working at a loose thread on his coat. "Rick. That's my mom's husband. He says I make too much noise when mom's sleeping. She works. Nights at the hospital, you know. He says I disturb her rest." Sarah nodded, remembering Maria Rodriguez from the last parent-teacher conference, a tired-looking woman in nursing scrubs who had spoken proudly of her son, despite obviously fighting exhaustion. "So, when mom's sleeping during the day after her shift, I stay very quiet," Ethan continued, his voice taking on the matter-of-fact tone children sometimes use when describing the unthinkable. "But at night, when she's working, Rick says I'm too loud, even when I'm just walking to the bathroom or getting water. He says I'm disrespectful." Sarah felt the first stirrings of true alarm. "What happens then, Ethan?" The boy shrugged, a gesture too world-weary for his small shoulders. "He makes me go outside until I learn respect. Sometimes it's just for an hour, but lately—" He hesitated, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn, spiral-bound notebook. "I've been keeping track, like we did for our science project on weather patterns." He opened the notebook and pushed it toward her. Sarah found herself looking at meticulously recorded dates, times, and temperatures written in a child's careful handwriting. Each entry included a duration, sometimes marked as all night. The most recent entries showed overnight temperatures well below freezing. "Ethan," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice calm despite her racing heart, "when Rick makes you go outside, where do you go?" "I sleep in Mom's car," he replied. "She leaves the keys so I can turn on the heat if it gets too cold. But Rick takes them away if he catches me using too much gas. He says I'm wasting money." Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she turned the pages of the notebook. The entries went back months, with increasing frequency since December. "I'm okay, though," Ethan continued quickly, perhaps sensing her distress. "I have a system. I brought my sleeping bag from when Mom and I used to go camping, and Rusty keeps me warm, too." "Rusty?" "My dog. He's old, but Rick doesn't like him in the house either, so we keep each other company." Ethan's face brightened slightly. He's a really good dog. I made him a bed in the back seat. Sarah felt sick. This child had been methodically documenting his own mistreatment while simultaneously creating survival systems to endure it. "Does your mom know about this, Ethan?" The boy's expression clouded. "I don't think so. Rick says if I tell her, she'll lose her job because she'll be too upset to work. Then we'll be homeless." His voice dropped lower, and he says they'd take me away from her. Sarah closed the notebook, her decision made. "Ethan, I need to speak with someone about this. What Rick is doing isn't right. It's not safe for you to sleep in a car, especially in this weather." Panic flashed across Ethan's face. "Please don't! He'll know I told. I just won't fall asleep in class anymore, I promise." "You're not in trouble," Sarah reassured him, reaching out to gently cover his small hand with hers. "But part of my job is making sure you're safe. How about we talk to Officer Wilson? You know him from the safety assemblies. He can help us figure out what to do." Ethan hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Can Rusty come inside somewhere too? He's really cold at night." "We'll make sure Rusty's taken care of too," Sarah promised, thinking that the boy's concern for his dog, even in this situation, spoke volumes about his character. She reached for her classroom phone, dialing the extension for the school resource officer. Daniel Wilson had been Pinecrest Elementary's resource officer for 5 years, a position he'd taken after 12 years with Oakwood Police Department's Family Services Division. The career change had come after a particularly difficult case involving domestic violence had ended tragically, a failure of the system that had left him questioning his ability to protect those who needed it most. The school position was supposed to be less intense, more preventative than reactive, but Daniel had never been able to fully leave behind his training or instincts. When Sarah Mitchell's call came through, he'd been preparing to leave for the day. Something in her, usually composed voice immediately put him on alert. "I have a student situation that can't wait," she'd said simply. "Fourth grader, possible neglect or abuse situation." "On my way," he'd responded, grabbing his jacket. Now, as Daniel entered the classroom, he immediately noticed the small boy sitting at the desk. Dark hair that needed a trim, clothes slightly too small, and eyes that held the wariness Daniel had seen too many times in children who'd learned early that adults couldn't always be trusted. But there was something else there too, intelligence and resilience. "Hey there," Daniel said, keeping his voice casual as he pulled up a chair. "I'm Officer Wilson, but you can call me Daniel if you want. What's your name?" "Ethan Rodriguez," the boy replied quietly. Sarah handed Daniel the notebook without comment. As he flipped through the pages, his expression remained professionally neutral, despite the anger building inside him at what the dates and temperatures represented. "You've got quite a detailed record here, Ethan," Daniel said finally, impressed, despite the circumstances. "Very scientific approach." Ethan straightened slightly at the praise. "I like science. Ms. Mitchell taught us about keeping accurate data." "Did you know I used to work with families before I came to Pinecrest?" Daniel asked conversationally, helping kids and parents who were having a tough time. Ethan glanced up. "Did you carry a gun then too?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Yes, but I hardly ever needed it. Mostly I just listened and talked, kind of. Like we're doing now." He tapped the notebook. "Would it be okay if you told me a bit more about this?" Over the next 30 minutes, with gentle questioning from Daniel and occasional reassurance from Sarah, Ethan shared more details about his life at Meadowbrook Apartments. His mother, Maria, worked night shifts as a nurse, often taking double shifts to make ends meet. Rick, her husband of 18 months, worked construction and was responsible for Ethan during the evenings. The problems had started small: criticism, harsh words, making Ethan eat alone in his room, but had escalated after Rick lost his foreman position 3 months ago. "He said I cost too much money," Ethan explained matter-of-factly. That's when he started making me sleep outside if I made noise. He said it was teaching me appreciation. And the car? That's where you go? Daniel asked. Ethan nodded. Mum's old Honda. It doesn't always start, but the doors lock. Rusty and I sleep in the back seat. Does Rick check on you when you're out there? Ethan shook his head. He says I'm not a baby. Daniel exchanged a glance with Sarah over Ethan's head. They both recognized the severity of the situation. A 9-year-old repeatedly locked out overnight in freezing temperatures, forced to sleep in a car that might not even provide reliable heat. Ethan, Daniel said carefully, I need to make some calls to help make sure you're safe tonight. Miss Mitchell will stay with you, okay? Maybe you could show her some more of your notebooks while I do that. Ethan nodded, though his eyes tracked Daniel anxiously as he stepped outside the classroom to make his calls. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the hallway, Daniel first contacted his supervisor at the police department, then Child Protective Services. The dispatcher confirmed they would send over a social worker immediately, but warned it might take time to arrange emergency placement given the hour. Daniel's next call was to Principal Hayes, who was still in her office catching up on paperwork. Jennifer Hayes had been running Pinecrest Elementary for nearly a decade and had established the school's community outreach program specifically to help families in crisis. She arrived at Sarah's classroom within minutes, her expression grave. As Daniel briefed her in the hallway, "We need to reach the mother," Jennifer said decisively, "and we need somewhere safe for Ethan tonight while we sort this out. CPS is sending someone, but emergency placement might take hours," Daniel explained, "and I'm concerned about approaching the stepfather at home without backup, especially if he's volatile." Jennifer nodded, her mind working through possibilities. "Maria works at Oakwood General, right? Night shift?" "According to Ethan, yes," Daniel confirmed. "Let me make a call. My sister's a nurse manager there. She can find Maria without alerting anyone else." While Jennifer stepped away to make her call, Daniel returned to the classroom. Ethan had visibly relaxed somewhat in his absence, showing Sarah a different notebook filled with detailed drawings of constellations and planets. "I use this one when I'm in the car," Ethan explained. "I can see the stars really well from the parking lot." Daniel felt a surge of admiration for the boy's resilience, finding wonder in the night sky, even while enduring such difficult circumstances. "Ethan," he said, sitting down beside them, "we're trying to reach your mom right now. In the meantime, I was wondering about Rusty. Is he at home or in the car right now?" "In the car," Ethan replied, worry creeping into his voice. "He doesn't have much food left in his container. I was going to refill it when I got home." "How about we go check on him?" Daniel suggested. "I have some dog treats in my office from when the K9 unit visited last month." Ethan's eyes widened. "Is Rusty in trouble?" "Not at all," Daniel assured him. "But I bet he'd be happy to see you, and we should make sure he's comfortable while we figure everything out." The suggestion of helping his dog seemed to ease some of Ethan's anxiety. The three of them were preparing to head out to the parking lot when Jennifer returned, her expression a controlled mask of professional concern. "I've spoken with Maria Rodriguez," she informed them quietly. "She's getting emergency coverage for her shift and will be here within 20 minutes. She had no idea." Jennifer didn't need to finish the sentence. The adults exchanged knowing glances over Ethan's head. How many times had they seen this pattern? A hard-working parent, struggling to make ends meet, unaware of what was happening during their absence. "Ethan," Jennifer said brightly, "I was thinking after we check on Rusty, you might like some hot chocolate in the cafeteria. Mrs. Patel is still here, and she mentioned she might have some cookies left from lunch." The small bribe worked its magic as Ethan's face lit up slightly at the mention of cookies. As they walked through the now empty school hallways, Daniel couldn't help but notice how Ethan's eyes continuously scanned his surroundings, mapping exits and staying alert, the unconscious behavior of a child who had learned to be vigilant in uncertain environments. The parking lot was nearly empty as they stepped outside into the bitter cold. A light snow had begun to fall, dusting the few remaining cars with white. Ethan led them to an older model Honda Civic parked at the far end of the lot. Its blue, paint faded, and rust beginning to form around the wheel wells. "This is Mom's car," Ethan explained, digging into his pocket for a key. "I brought the spare key today because I was worried about Rusty." As soon as Ethan unlocked the door, they heard the excited whimpering of a dog. When he opened it, an elderly beagle mix scrambled out, his tail wagging frantically as he circled Ethan's legs before cautiously approaching the adults. "He's friendly," Ethan assured them, kneeling to embrace the dog. "Just a little scared of new people since Rick yelled at him so much." Daniel crouched down, allowing Rusty to sniff his extended hand before gently patting the dog's head. "He looks like a good friend," he said, noting the dog's good condition despite the circumstances, another testament to Ethan's responsible care. "He keeps me warm," Ethan replied simply, "and he listens when I read my books out loud." Sarah felt her heart constrict at the image of this boy reading alone in a cold car to his elderly dog. She glanced into the vehicle and saw the evidence of Ethan's overnight stays. A child-sized sleeping bag carefully arranged in the back seat, a small LED lantern clipped to the ceiling handle, books stacked neatly on the floor, and a plastic container with dog food and a water bowl secured so it wouldn't spill. These weren't the hasty accommodations of a single night's banishment. This was a methodically organized living space created by a child who had adapted to ongoing displacement. Most disturbing was how neatly everything was arranged. Nothing left to chance or criticism. No excuse for further punishment. Inside the car, tucked between the seats, Sarah noticed another notebook. With Ethan's permission, she retrieved it, finding yet more detailed records. This time of food supplies for both himself and Rusty, carefully calculated to last between opportunities to access the kitchen when Rick wasn't around. Back in the cafeteria, with Rusty curled contentedly at Ethan's feet beneath the table and hot chocolate warming his hands, Ethan seemed to relax further. Daniel had procured a bowl of water and some leftover hamburger for the dog, earning him a shy smile from the boy. "Is my mom really coming?" Ethan asked suddenly, his voice small. "She's not supposed to leave work. Rick says her job is more important than anything." "She's on her way," Jennifer confirmed. "And sometimes, Ethan, the most important job a parent has is making sure their child is safe and loved. Everything else comes second." Before Ethan could respond, the cafeteria doors burst open and a woman rushed in, still wearing hospital scrubs beneath her hastily donned winter coat. Maria Rodriguez's eyes frantically scanned the room until they landed on her son. For a moment she stood frozen, as if afraid he might vanish if she moved too quickly. "Ethan," she finally managed, her voice breaking. "Mom?" Ethan looked confused, almost disbelieving. "But your shift!" Maria was already crossing the room, dropping to her knees beside her son's chair and pulling him into a tight embrace. "My shift doesn't matter. You matter. Oh, mijijo, I'm so sorry." Ethan remained stiff for a moment before melting into his mother's arms. Rusty, recognizing Maria, pushed his nose against her leg, his tail wagging hopefully. The adults moved, a respectful distance away, giving mother and son privacy for their reunion while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Maria's muffled apologies and Ethan's quiet responses blended together as they held each other. Finally, Maria stood, keeping one arm firmly around Ethan's shoulders as she faced the others. Her eyes were red but dry, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude, shame, and fierce determination. "Thank you for calling me," she said, her gaze moving between Sarah, Daniel, and Jennifer. "I had no idea. I thought—" She stopped, visibly struggling with her emotions. "Rick told me Ethan was having behavior problems, that he was helping discipline him. I've been working so many shifts trying to save for a better place." She looked down at her son. "I never imagined he would do this." Daniel stepped forward, his manner professional but kind. "Ms. Rodriguez, we need to discuss what happens. Next, Officer Parker is on his way to your apartment now to speak with Mr. Davis, and a social worker will be arriving soon to assess the situation." Fear flashed across Maria's face. "Will they take Ethan away from me?" It was the same fear that Ethan had expressed earlier, clearly planted by Rick as a means of control. Before Daniel could respond, Jennifer spoke up. "Our immediate concern is making sure both Ethan and you have a safe place tonight. Everything else can be addressed tomorrow with the proper supports in place." "My sister's place," Maria said immediately. "She's in Greenfield, about 30 minutes from here. Rick doesn't know where she lives." She hesitated, glancing at Ethan's worn backpack. "But we'll need to get some of our things." "I can arrange for an officer to accompany you to collect essential items," Daniel offered, "but only after we've made contact with Mr. Davis." Rusty whined softly, pressing against Ethan's legs. The boy looked down at his pet, then up at the adults. "Can Rusty come too? Rick says he'll take him to the pound if he makes noise again." "Of course Rusty comes with us," Maria said firmly, reaching down to pat the dog's head. "We stay together from now on." The social worker arrived 20 minutes later, a compassionate but no-nonsense woman named Grace Wilson, who, by coincidence, turned out to be Officer Wilson's sister-in-law. The family connection seemed to help put Maria at ease as they discussed temporary safety plans and next steps. While Grace interviewed Maria privately, Sarah sat with Ethan at another table, helping him organize his notebooks and drawings from the car. Daniel had retrieved all of Ethan's belongings from the vehicle, treating each item with the careful respect he would give to evidence, which in many ways they were. "You're very organized," Sarah commented, watching as Ethan meticulously arranged his constellation drawings in order of completion date. "I like knowing where everything is," Ethan replied. "That way, nobody can say I lost something or made a mess." Sarah nodded, understanding the coping mechanism for what it was, a child's attempt to control what little he could in an unpredictable environment. "You know," she said carefully, "what happened wasn't because you were too loud or disrespectful. Mr. Davis made bad choices, not you." Ethan's hands stilled over his papers. "But if I had been quieter—" "No," Sarah said gently but firmly. "Adults are responsible for keeping children safe. That's our job. You did nothing wrong, Ethan." He considered this for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Then why did he do it? It was the fundamental question, asked with a child's directness, and Sarah wished she had a better answer. Sometimes adults have problems that make them act in ways that hurt others. It doesn't make it right, and it's never the child's fault. Before Ethan could respond, Daniel returned to the cafeteria, his expression grim but controlled as he approached Grace and Maria. The three adults spoke in hushed tones, with Maria's hand rising to cover her mouth at one point. When they returned to the table, Maria's face was pale but composed. "The police have arrested Rick," she told Ethan, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "He won't be coming near us again." "Was he mad?" Ethan asked, his voice small. "That doesn't matter anymore," Maria said firmly. "What matters is that you're safe now." She looked at Daniel. "Officer Wilson says we can go to the apartment to pack some things. His partner will meet us there." Grace added, "And I've arranged for emergency housing assistance if you need it, Ms. Rodriguez. There are options besides going back to that apartment." Maria nodded gratefully, then turned to Sarah. "Ms. Mitchell, I don't know how to thank you for noticing, for caring enough to ask questions. I'm just glad Ethan trusted me enough to share what was happening," Sarah replied, though she knew it would be some time before she could shake the image of Ethan's meticulous temperature logs and the matter-of-fact way he had described sleeping in a freezing car. As they prepared to leave, Ethan hesitated, then approached Sarah with one of his notebooks, the one containing his star charts and constellation drawings. "I want you to have this," he said solemnly, holding it out to her, "so you can see the stars too." Sarah accepted the notebook, recognizing the significance of the gift. "Thank you, Ethan. I'll treasure it." Outside, the snow had intensified, blanketing the school grounds in white. Daniel escorted Maria, Ethan, and Rusty to his police cruiser, arranging for them to follow him to the apartment to collect their belongings. As they drove away, Sarah stood beside Jennifer in the falling snow, watching until the taillights disappeared around the corner. "Do you think they'll be okay?" Sarah asked. Jennifer sighed, her breath forming a cloud in the cold air. "Maria seems like a fighter now that she knows what's happening. And Ethan," she shook her head in wonder, "that boy has remarkable resilience. Did you see his notebooks? The careful records, the star charts?" Sarah nodded, thinking about the child who had found beauty in the night sky, even while enduring cold and fear. He found ways to cope, to make sense of things. "Those same strengths will help him heal," Jennifer said, "especially now that he has proper support." The next morning, Sarah arrived early to find a note in her faculty mailbox. It was from Daniel, letting her know that Maria and Ethan were safely settled at the sisters' home, and that Child Protective Services would be providing ongoing support. Rick remained in custody, facing multiple charges of child endangerment and neglect. When Sarah entered her classroom, she placed Ethan's constellation notebook carefully on her desk, opening it to a particularly detailed drawing of Orion. Beside the constellation, in a child's careful handwriting, Ethan had written, "Visible all winter. Looks like a protector." She traced the stars with her finger, thinking of the boy who had observed them from the back seat of a cold car, finding comfort in their constant presence. Tomorrow, he would have a warm bed, his mother's, watchful care, and the knowledge that he had been brave enough to reach out for help. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most important lessons happened outside the curriculum. Lessons about courage, resilience, and the difference one person could make by simply paying attention to a tired child falling asleep in class. 3 weeks had passed since that snowy night at Pinecrest Elementary. The morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains as Ethan Rodriguez woke in his temporary bedroom at his Aunt Lucia's house in Greenfield. The space was small, converted from a home office, but it was warm, and the door had no lock on. The outside. These simple facts still amazed him every morning. Rusty lay curled at the foot of the bed, grey muzzle twitching as he dreamed. The old beagle had adjusted quickly to their new living situation, especially after discovering that Aunt Lucia was liberal with treats and affection. Ethan reached down to gently stroke the dog's head, careful not to wake him. These quiet moments in the morning, when he could simply exist without fear or calculation, still felt strange, like a dream he might suddenly wake from. The house was quiet. His mother would still be sleeping after her night shift at the local clinic, a new job with better hours that kept her in Greenfield rather than commuting back to Oakwood. Aunt Lucia had already left for her job at the bank. The digital clock on the nightstand read 6:42 a.m. School wouldn't start for nearly 2 hours, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to go back to sleep. Old habits died hard. For months, he'd trained himself to wake before Rick, to clean up any evidence of his presence, to move silently through the apartment gathering what he'd need for the day. Even now, safe in his aunt's house, his body remained on high alert, primed for survival. Ethan slipped out of bed and padded to the small desk by the window. His notebooks were stacked neatly in the corner, not out of fear anymore, but because order still brought him comfort. He selected one with a blue cover, opening it to review his newest project. A detailed map of his new neighborhood with walking routes to school, the local library, the park, and other safe zones clearly marked. Dr. Collins, his therapist, had suggested the project as a way to help him feel more secure in his new environment. Knowledge is power, she'd told him during their second session, and knowing your surroundings can help you feel more in control. It had been exactly what Ethan needed to hear. He dedicated hours to exploring Greenfield with his mother on weekends, cataloging landmarks and memorizing street names. A soft knock on the doorframe drew his attention. His mother stood there, dark circles under her eyes, but a gentle smile on her face. She wore the faded Oakwood General Hospital sweatshirt she still slept in, despite no longer working there. "You're up early," Maria observed, her voice still rough with sleep. "Couldn't wait to try out your new colored pencils?" Ethan glanced down at the fresh set of art supplies on his desk, a gift from Ms. Mitchell, who had driven out to Greenfield the previous weekend to check on him. His former teacher had brought not only the pencils, but also a star chart for the spring sky and news about his classmates at Pinecrest. "I was adding the pond behind the library to my map," Ethan explained, showing her the detailed drawing. "There were ducks there yesterday." Maria stepped into the room, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed to avoid disturbing Rusty. "It's looking really good," she said, studying the map. "You've got quite an eye for detail." Ethan shrugged, though the praise warmed him. "It helps me remember where everything is." Maria nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. She reached out to gently brush his overlong bangs from his forehead. "Mrs. Patel called yesterday while you were at Dr. Collins's office. She wanted to know if we'd be at the custody hearing today." Ethan tensed slightly. Although he'd been told multiple times that Rick was not getting out of jail anytime soon, the upcoming hearing still filled him with dread. "Do I have to go?" "No, mijo. Officer Wilson will be there representing our interests. You don't have to see Rick at all." She hesitated, then added, "But Mrs. Patel thought you might like to know that several of your teachers from Pinecrest are going to be there." They all submitted statements to the judge. This surprised Ethan. He hadn't realized how many people had been involved in his case. Even Mr. Abernathy. The strict science teacher had always seemed more interested in perfect lab reports than in his students' lives. Maria smiled. "Especially Mr. Abernathy. Officer Wilson says he wrote 3 pages about your scientific method in documenting the temperatures." Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions. Embarrassment that so many adults knew about his situation, but also a warm sense of being protected, not just by his mother, but by a community he hadn't fully realized existed around him. "Can we call Ms. Mitchell later to say thank you for the pencils?" he asked, changing the subject. "Of course. Why don't you get dressed while I make breakfast? Aunt Lucia left waffles in the fridge we can heat up." As Maria turned to leave, Ethan called after her, "Mom, do you think we'll ever go back to Oakwood?" She paused in the doorway, her expression complicated. "Would you want to?" Ethan considered this seriously. "Not to the apartment, but I miss my friends, and Ms. Mitchell, and the planetarium at the Science Center." Maria nodded slowly. "We'll see, mijo. For now, let's focus on making Greenfield home. But nothing says we can't visit Oakwood sometimes when you're ready." After she left, Ethan returned to his map, carefully adding a small star next to the pond to mark it as a special place. He'd seen a great blue heron there yesterday, standing perfectly still in the shallows. He'd watched it for nearly 30 minutes until it suddenly struck the water with lightning speed, emerging with a fish. Patience rewarded. That seemed important somehow. Rusty finally stirred, stretching and yawning before jumping down from the bed to nudge Ethan's hand. The routine was established now. Morning petting, followed by breakfast, followed by a short walk around the block. The normalcy of it all still felt slightly unreal, as if Ethan were playing a role in someone else's life. Later that morning, as Ethan and his mother walked the 6 blocks to Greenfield Elementary, Rusty trotting alongside them on his leash, they passed the small community center where Daniel Wilson had unexpectedly appeared the previous week. He'd driven the 40 minutes from Oakwood just to deliver the rest of Ethan's belongings that had been collected from the apartment, including his treasured telescope, a gift from his biological father before he'd left. The officer had stayed for nearly an hour, talking with Maria about the upcoming hearing, while Ethan recalibrated the telescope's finder scope in the backyard. Before leaving, Daniel had awkwardly presented Ethan with a junior astronomy guidebook, the gesture clearly unrehearsed but sincere. "You ever want to talk stars or planets, you give me a call," he'd said, passing Ethan a business card with his personal number written on the back. "My daughter's about your age, and she's into space stuff too. Drives her mother crazy with all the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling." That small revelation, that Officer Wilson was a father with a daughter who liked stars, had shifted something in Ethan's perception. The officer wasn't just a uniform or authority figure, but a person with a family, someone who might genuinely care, not just because it was his job. "Mom," Ethan said now as they approached the school, "do you think Officer Wilson is coming to the hearing because it's his job or because he wants to?" Maria looked down at him, her expression softening. "I think it started as his job, but now it's because he cares about what happens to you. People can surprise you that way." It was a new concept for Ethan, who had grown used to the adults in his life falling into predictable categories: those who didn't notice, those who noticed but did nothing, and those rare few, like his mother, who tried their best but were often overwhelmed by circumstance. At the school entrance, Maria knelt to give him a hug. "Remember, Aunt Lucia will pick you up today, since I'll be at the hearing. And Dr. Collins says she'd like you to try the group session after school tomorrow, if you feel ready." Ethan nodded, though the thought of sharing his experiences with other kids made his stomach tighten. Dr. Collins had explained that the group was for children who had lived through difficult family situations, a euphemism Ethan now recognized as covering everything from parents' divorces to situations like his own. "I'll try," he promised, knowing it would make his mother happy. He'd grown increasingly aware of the shadow that crossed her face whenever she thought about what he'd endured while she was working. Dr. Collins had assured him repeatedly that none of it was his mother's fault, that Rick had deliberately deceived her, but Ethan could see the guilt she carried nonetheless. Rusty whined softly as Ethan prepared to leave, sensing the impending separation. Although registered now as a therapy animal, the dog wasn't allowed to accompany Ethan to school except for his weekly session with the school counselor. "Be good for Mom," Ethan instructed Rusty, giving him a final pat. "No chasing Mrs. Garcia's cat again." As he walked through the double doors of Greenfield Elementary, Ethan mentally reviewed his schedule for the day. Unlike at Pinecrest, where he'd worked hard to be invisible, to complete assignments perfectly so no one would have reason to contact his mother or Rick, here he was, trying to learn how to simply be a normal 4th grader. It was surprisingly difficult. His new teacher, Mr. Lowell, had been briefed on Ethan's situation and went out of his way to make accommodations without calling attention to them. When Ethan had a panic attack during a fire drill during his first week, Mr. Lowell had calmly walked him through breathing exercises in the hallway while the other students filed past, neither making a scene nor dismissing Ethan's fear. Today, they were scheduled to work on group science projects, something that would have filled him with dread at Pinecrest. Here, though, his assigned partners, twins named Maya and Miguel, had welcomed him into their group with easy friendliness, seemingly unfazed by his quiet demeanor. Ethan stored his backpack in his assigned cubby, carefully arranging his notebooks and pencil case in precise alignment. Some habits remained comforting even when they were no longer necessary for survival. As he finished, Maya appeared beside him, her dark curls bouncing as she rocked excitedly on her heels. "Did you bring your mineral samples?" she asked without preamble. "Miguel found some really cool ones in our backyard yesterday. We think one might be quartz." The enthusiasm in her voice made Ethan smile despite himself. "I brought the ones. From the creek," he confirmed, "and the magnifying glass my aunt let me borrow." "Perfect," Maya declared. "Mr. Lowell said we'll have the whole morning for our project. I bet ours will be the best." The simple confidence in her statement, the easy inclusion of Ethan in the we and ours, still caught him off guard. At his old school, he'd worked alone whenever possible, finding group work fraught with social complexities he couldn't navigate while also managing his home situation. As the morning progressed, Ethan found himself gradually relaxing into the rhythm of collaborative work. Maya was enthusiastic and creative, while Miguel was methodical and precise, a combination that complemented Ethan's own analytical approach. By lunchtime, their classification of local minerals was taking shape, complete with detailed sketches and observations. In the cafeteria, Ethan sat with the twins as he had every day since his arrival. Their easy chatter about video games, their soccer league, and their grandmother's upcoming visit required little input from him beyond occasional nods or one-word responses. It was comfortable, being adjacent to their normalcy without having to perform it himself. "Are you coming to Carlos's birthday party on Saturday?" Miguel asked during a pause in the conversation. "His mom invited our whole class. They're having it at the bowling alley." Ethan froze with his sandwich halfway to his mouth. A party with the entire class. The very idea made his palms sweat. I don't know," he managed. "I haven't checked with my mom." Maya tilted her head. "You should come. Carlos said they're getting a chocolate cake from Martino's bakery. It's the best." Before Ethan could formulate a response, the cafeteria monitor approached their table. "Ethan, your aunt is here to pick you up early." Confusion and alarm immediately flared in Ethan's chest. Early pickup wasn't part of the plan. Had something happened at the hearing? Was his mother okay? "The hearing," Maya said, eyes widening, in understanding. "Miguel and I saw it on the news this morning, about your stepdad." Ethan stared at her, mortified. "It was on the news?" Miguel nodded solemnly. "Local channel. Our mom had it on while we were eating breakfast. She turned it off when she saw us watching, but we heard them say Meadowbrook Apartments." The idea that his private nightmare had been broadcast on television, that his new classmates might know details about his life he'd barely begun to process himself, made Ethan feel suddenly exposed, like being caught outside in the freezing cold without his protective layers. "I have to go," he mumbled, gathering his lunch debris with trembling hands. "Ethan," Maya said, her voice gentler than he'd ever heard it. "It's okay. Our cousin lived in a car with our uncle for a while when we were little. That's why he lives with our grandma now." The simple statement, delivered without drama or pity, startled Ethan into momentary stillness. He looked at the twins' faces, expecting to see the morbid curiosity or uncomfortable sympathy he'd glimpsed on the faces of adults who knew his situation. Instead, he saw only matter-of-fact acceptance. "You don't think it's weird?" he asked cautiously. Miguel shrugged. "Lots of kids have hard stuff. Carlos's dad is in jail too, and Destiny's mom had to go to the hospital for a long time last year because she was really sad. Not that what happened to you wasn't really bad," Maya added hastily. "Our mom explained that it was super wrong and dangerous. But it doesn't make you weird, just tough. Ethan didn't know how to respond to this assessment. Tough wasn't a word he'd ever associated with himself. Careful, yes. Prepared, certainly. But tough implied a strength he wasn't sure he possessed. Ethan, the cafeteria monitor called again, gesturing toward the exit where he could see Aunt Lucia waiting, her expression tense. "I have to go," he repeated, but added, "Thanks for telling me about your cousin." Maya smiled. "So you'll come to the party?" Against all logic, Ethan found himself nodding. "I'll ask my mom." Aunt Lucia was uncharacteristically quiet as they drove away from the school, Ethan in the back seat with his seatbelt securely fastened. Usually she filled silences with cheerful chatter about her day at the bank or questions about his classes. Today, she kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is Mom okay?" Ethan finally asked, unable to bear the suspense any longer. "She's fine, mijo," Lucia assured him quickly. "The hearing is still going on. She asked me to pick you up because, well, there's been a development." Ethan's stomach clenched. In his experience, developments were rarely positive. "Is Rick getting out?" he asked, his voice small. "No, absolutely not," Lucia said firmly. "If anything, he'll be staying in jail longer because of what they found in the apartment during the final inspection. This was unexpected." "What did they find?" Lucia hesitated, then sighed. "I think it's better if your mother explains when she gets home. But I want you to know that you're safe. Rick is not getting out of jail anytime soon, and he will never be allowed near you again." They drove in silence for a few more minutes before Lucia spoke again, her voice gentler. "Your mom thought you might like to spend the afternoon at the planetarium in Oakwood. Officer Wilson offered to meet us there. He said something about wanting your expert opinion on their new exhibit about exoplanets." The sudden change of plans was disorienting, but the mention of the planetarium, Ethan's favorite place in Oakwood, caught his attention. "Really? But it's a school day." Lucia smiled at him in the mirror. "Sometimes special circumstances call for special arrangements. Your principal agreed that an educational field trip was appropriate given the situation." The Oakwood Science Center Planetarium had been Ethan's sanctuary long before Rick entered their lives. His mother had first taken him there for a special exhibition when he was 5, and he'd been entranced by the immersive star show. In the years that followed, they'd visit whenever they could afford it, usually on Maria's rare days off. After Rick moved in, those visits had stopped abruptly. "Waste of money," he declared after discovering the membership card in Maria's wallet. "The kid can look at the real stars for free." The cruel irony of that statement hadn't been lost on Ethan when he'd later found himself doing exactly that, studying the night sky from the back seat of a cold car, using the stars to mark the passage of time until morning. As they merged onto the highway toward Oakwood, Ethan watched the familiar landscape pass by. It was strange returning to the city where he'd experienced so much fear and uncertainty. Yet there was comfort in the familiarity too. The skyline he'd drawn countless times in his notebooks. The river winding alongside the highway, the distinctive shape of the Science Center dome appearing as they crested the hill. "Mom said we might visit Oakwood sometimes," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Not to live, but to see my friends and the planetarium." Lucia nodded. "I think that would be good. Greenfield is home for now, but Oakwood has good memories too. From before. Everything. Before Rick. Before the car. Before the notebooks filled with temperature readings and survival strategies. It was strange to think there had been a time when staying warm through the night wasn't his primary concern, when he didn't calculate every word and movement to avoid triggering anger, when he slept in a bed every night without question. They pulled into the Science Center parking lot, and Ethan immediately spotted Officer Wilson leaning against his personal vehicle, a dark blue SUV, rather than his police cruiser. The officer straightened as they parked nearby, raising a hand, in greeting. "Good timing," Daniel said as they approached. "The show about the James Webb Telescope discoveries starts in 20 minutes. I got us tickets for that one and the regular star show after." Ethan studied the officer's casual appearance, jeans and a NASA t-shirt instead of his uniform, and realized this wasn't an official visit. Daniel had come on his day off. "Thank you for meeting us," Lucia said, extending her hand. "Maria speaks very highly of you and everything you've done." Daniel shook her hand, then smiled down at Ethan. "I figured we could all use a break from hearings and serious conversations for a few hours. Plus, I've been wanting to see this exhibit myself. My daughter Zoe saw it on a school field trip and wouldn't stop talking about it." As they walked toward the entrance, Daniel fell into step beside Ethan. "I hear you're settling in well at Greenfield Elementary. Making friends?" Ethan nodded cautiously. "The twins in my class, Maya and Miguel, they're nice. They invited me to a birthday party." "That's great," Daniel said, sounding genuinely pleased. "Will you go?" "Maybe, if Mom says it's okay." Ethan hesitated, then added, "They know about what happened. They saw it on the news." Daniel's expression shifted, concern replacing his casual smile. "And how do you feel about that?" It was the kind of direct question Dr. Collins often asked, the kind that required Ethan to actually examine his emotions rather than deflect or rationalize them. He considered it seriously as they passed through the Science Center doors into the familiar atrium with its massive pendulum swinging in perpetual motion. "I thought I'd be embarrassed," he said finally, "or that they'd think I was weird. But they just said it meant I was tough, and that other kids have hard stuff too." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That's pretty insightful of them. And they're right, you know, what you went through, how you handled it, keeping those detailed records, taking care of yourself and Rusty, finding ways to stay warm and safe. That shows remarkable resilience." Resilience. It was a word Dr. Collins used frequently too. Ethan wasn't entirely sure he understood what it meant in practical terms, but he was beginning to recognize it had something to do with adapting to difficult situations without breaking. "Is that why everyone keeps saying I'm brave?" he asked. "Because I don't feel brave. Mostly I was just scared all the time." Daniel stopped walking, turning to face Ethan directly. He crouched down slightly so they were at eye level, not in the exaggerated way some adults spoke to children, but with genuine respect. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," he said quietly. "It means you keep going even when you are scared. You find solutions, you adapt, you survive. That's exactly what you did, Ethan." Lucia had moved ahead to collect their tickets from will call, leaving them a moment of privacy in the busy atrium. Ethan studied Officer Wilson's face, searching for signs of insincerity or the adult condescension he'd grown adept at recognizing. He found none. "What happened at the hearing today?" Ethan asked, changing the subject. "Why did Aunt Lucia pick me up early?" Daniel straightened, his expression carefully neutral. "That's really something your mother should explain. But I can tell you that some new evidence came to light that makes Rick's case even more serious than before." "What kind of evidence?" Daniel hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "They found some things hidden in the apartment that suggest Rick was involved in activities that put you and your mother at even greater risk than we initially realized. I promise your mom will explain everything when she gets home." Before Ethan could press further, Lucia returned with their tickets and planetarium schedule. "The show starts in 10 minutes, she announced, "and they have a special exhibit on Mars rovers that we can visit afterward." As they made their way to the planetarium dome, Ethan found his anxiety about the hearing gradually receding, replaced by the familiar excitement he always felt in this space. The Science Center had been his first introduction to astronomy, sparking a passion that had sustained him even during the darkest nights in the car. Inside the darkened dome, as the projector brought the night sky to life above them, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. Here, surrounded by the constellations he'd studied so diligently from the backseat window, he could almost forget the circumstances that had made him such an expert on the winter sky. Daniel leaned over during a section about distant galaxies. "You know," he whispered, "my daughter's school is doing a science fair next month focusing on astronomy. She's nervous about her project on lunar phases. I bet she'd appreciate some expert advice, if you're willing." The suggestion, so normal, so ordinary, caught Ethan by surprise. Not a therapy session or a court hearing or a protected visit, but simply helping another kid with a science project. Something a regular fourth grader might do. "I could help," he said quietly. "I did a project on lunar phases last year. I still have my notes." Daniel smiled. She'd love that. After the show, as they explored the Mars rover exhibit, Ethan found himself explaining the difference between the Curiosity and Perseverance missions to Daniel with increasing animation. Knowledge had always been his refuge, facts and figures a safe territory where he felt confident. But sharing that knowledge, seeing someone genuinely interested in his explanations, that was newer and surprisingly satisfying. They were examining a scale model of the Ingenuity helicopter when Lucia's phone rang. She stepped away to answer it, returning moments later with a relieved expression. "That was your mom," she told Ethan. "The hearing is over. She's going to meet us here in about 30 minutes. Is she okay?" Ethan asked immediately, attuned to the slightest hint of distress in the adults around him. "She's fine," Lucia assured him. "Better than fine, actually." She sounded lighter. Lighter. It was an interesting choice of words, one that made Ethan think of the helium balloons they'd released at school for Science Week, watching the colorful spheres rise unencumbered into the blue sky, free from the tethers that had held them down. Maria Rodriguez arrived at the Oakwood Science Center just as Ethan was explaining the soil composition of Mars to an increasingly impressed Officer Wilson. When Ethan spotted his mother entering the exhibition hall, he fell silent mid-sentence. Studying her expression for clues about the hearing, what he saw surprised him. Despite the obvious exhaustion in the slump of her shoulders, Maria's face held something Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. A quiet determination, perhaps even hope. "Mom!" he called, waving to catch her attention. Maria spotted them and moved. Through the crowd, her smile widening as she approached. She wore the navy blue dress she reserved for important occasions, paired with the small gold earrings that had belonged to Ethan's grandmother. She looked professional, put together, so different from the harried, perpetually exhausted woman Rick had methodically reduced her to over the past 18 months. "Ethan," she said warmly, pulling him into a tight hug before nodding to Daniel. "And Lucia, thank you both for bringing him here. I think we needed something good today." "We saw the show about the James Webb Telescope," Ethan informed her, searching her face for signs of distress. "And the Mars rover exhibit. Did you know Perseverance has a helicopter called Ingenuity that flies in the Martian atmosphere even though it's much thinner than Earth's?" Maria smiled at his enthusiasm, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I didn't know that. You'll have to tell me all about it on the drive home." She turned to Daniel, her expression becoming more serious. "Officer Wilson, I don't know how to thank you for everything today. Your testimony it made all the difference." Daniel shook his head modestly. "I just told the truth about what we found. You and Ethan did the hard part by coming forward in the first place. Ethan looked between them, aware they were talking around him rather than to him, a familiar adult behavior that usually meant they were trying to shield him from something unpleasant. "What happened at the hearing?" he asked directly. "Aunt Lucia said they found something in the apartment." Maria exchanged a glance with Daniel, who gave her a slight nod. She sighed, then crouched down to meet Ethan's eyes. "Yes, mijo. When the police did the final inspection of the apartment to collect the rest of our belongings, they found some things hidden in Rick's workbench in the storage closet. Things that explain a lot about why he was so paranoid and angry all the time." "Drugs?" Ethan guessed, remembering overheard arguments between Rick and his mother about Rick's friends and their bad habits. Maria looked momentarily startled by his perception, but nodded. "Yes, but not just a small amount for personal use, enough that they believe he was selling it. There were also lists of names, amounts owed, and—" She hesitated, glancing at Daniel again. "An unregistered firearm," Daniel finished quietly, "a gun that wasn't legally owned." Ethan absorbed this information with the careful analytical approach he'd developed for processing difficult realities. Is that why he didn't want anyone coming to the apartment? Why he got so mad when Mom's friend Carmen stopped by that time? "We think so," Maria confirmed. "He was hiding illegal things, and he was afraid of being caught." "That's why he put us in the car," Ethan said slowly, pieces falling into place. "So I wouldn't be inside where I might find his stuff or tell someone about the people who came over sometimes late at night." The adults exchanged concerned glances, clearly surprised by this new information. "What people, Ethan?" Daniel asked carefully. Ethan shrugged. "Men I didn't know. They would come really late, usually when Mum was working. They would stay for maybe 10 minutes, then leave. Rick always made me go to the car if he knew they were coming. He said I was too noisy." Maria closed her eyes briefly, pain evident in her expression. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was doing that." "I know," Ethan said simply. He'd never blamed his mother for not knowing. Rick had been careful to keep her in the dark, scheduling his meetings during her night shifts, destroying any evidence before she returned home. Daniel's professional demeanor momentarily slipped, revealing genuine anger. "We'll need to add this to the report. It establishes a pattern of using the car as a way to remove Ethan from the apartment during drug deals." Lucia, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, and maybe over some lunch. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm starving." The suggestion broke the tension, and Maria nodded gratefully. "That's a good idea. There's that diner near the park that Ethan always liked. Weber's?" Ethan felt a small surge of pleasure at the suggestion. Weber's diner had been another casualty of Rick's entry into their lives, deemed too expensive despite its reasonable prices. The promise of their loaded cheese fries and chocolate milkshakes was enough to temporarily push aside the heavier conversation about Rick's criminal activities. As they walked to the parking lot, Ethan found himself between his mother and Officer Wilson, with Aunt Lucia a few steps ahead, making a phone call to her boss about extending her time off. Without really thinking about it, Ethan reached out and took his mother's hand, something he hadn't done in public for at least a year, since Rick had mockingly called him a mama's boy for the gesture. Maria's fingers tightened around his, and when he glanced up, he was startled to see tears in her eyes despite her smile. "I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "You know that, right?" Ethan nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what she was. Proud of? Surviving, keeping records, not telling Rick's secrets? It seemed to him that he'd mostly just endured what he had to, finding small ways to make the unbearable slightly more bearable. At Weber's diner, they secured a corner booth away from other customers. The familiar restaurant with its 1950s decor, And perpetually sticky menus felt like a relic from another life. Ethan's life before Rick. He ran his fingers over the tabletop pattern he had once traced hundreds of times while waiting for food with his mother after her Sunday morning shifts. At the hospital, after they'd ordered a cheeseburger and milkshake for Ethan, coffee and a club sandwich for the adults, Maria continued explaining what had happened at the hearing. "The judge has denied Rick any possibility of bail," she said. "With the new drug and weapons charges on top of the child endangerment and neglect charges, he's facing a significant prison sentence. The district attorney believes he'll agree to a plea deal rather than go to trial." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked. "It means," Daniel explained, "that Rick will probably admit to the crimes in exchange for a somewhat shorter sentence. But even with a plea deal, he'll be in prison for many years. And more importantly, the judge has granted your mother a permanent restraining order against him." "That means he can never contact us again," Maria added. "Not while he's in prison, and not after he gets out. We are legally protected from him for life." The weight of this news settled over Ethan slowly. Rick would never sleep in their home again. Never control their movements, their food, their heat. Never send Ethan to the car on a freezing night. Never make his mother cry in the bathroom where she thought Ethan couldn't hear her. They were free of him, legally, permanently free. "What about our stuff?" Ethan asked, his mind turning to practical matters. "My books and Mom's nursing school certificates? The police have released everything except what they needed for evidence," Daniel said. "They've been packed up and are being held in storage until you decide what you want to do with them." Maria reached across the table and squeezed Ethan's hand. "We don't have to decide right away. We can stay with Aunt Lucia as long as we need to. But eventually we'll need our own place, right?" Ethan pressed. The question of where home would be, Greenfield or Oakwood, or somewhere entirely new, had been circling in his mind since they'd fled the apartment 3 weeks ago. "Eventually, yes," Maria agreed, "but we have time to figure that out together. The most important thing is that we're safe now." Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the serious conversation. Ethan took a bite of his cheeseburger, savoring the familiar taste. Small pleasures like this, a favorite food, a visit to the planetarium, even just walking without constant vigilance, were still novel enough to feel significant after months of deprivation. As they ate, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Daniel mentioned his daughter's upcoming school play, and Maria shared a funny story about a mix-up with patient charts at her new clinic. For brief stretches, they were just 4 people, enjoying a meal together, the shadow of the hearing and Rick's crimes temporarily set aside. When they finished eating, Daniel excused himself to make a phone call. As soon as he was out of earshot, Ethan turned to his mother. "Mom, is Officer Wilson in trouble for helping us?" Maria looked surprised. "No, why would you think that?" Ethan fidgeted with his straw wrapper. "At school today, Maya and Miguel said they saw something on the news about our case, and they mentioned Officer Wilson was there too. I just wondered if he got in trouble for caring too much, like you did with your job." The comment hit Maria hard. Ethan could see it in the way her shoulders tensed. His mother had lost her position at Oakwood General after missing too many shifts to attend court hearings and meetings with lawyers and social workers. The clinic job in Greenfield paid less and offered fewer opportunities for advancement. "That's different, mijo," she said gently. "I made choices about my priorities, and I don't regret them. You will always come before any job. As for Officer Wilson, no, he's not in trouble. In fact, from what his supervisor said today in court, they consider his work on our case to be exemplary." Ethan nodded, relieved. "Good, because he's nice. Not fake nice like Rick's friends, but actually nice." "Yes, he is," Maria agreed, a soft expression crossing her face. We've been very fortunate to have him and Ms. Mitchell and Principal Hayes and so many others who were willing to help when we needed it. When Daniel returned, he brought news that sent a jolt of anxiety through Ethan's carefully maintained composure. "I just spoke with Detective Reynolds," Daniel said, addressing Maria primarily, but including Ethan in his gaze. "They've finished processing the evidence from the apartment, and they've found something they think belongs to Ethan. It was hidden inside his telescope case." Ethan sat up straighter. "My telescope case? But I have my telescope. You brought it to Aunt Lucia's house last week." "The telescope, yes. But apparently the original case was still in the storage closet. Reynolds says there's a notebook inside it that matches the ones you kept your temperature logs in." Ethan frowned, racking his brain. He'd had several notebooks. During the months he'd spent sleeping in the car. Most had been in his backpack when he fled to Ms. Mitchell's classroom that day, but he vaguely remembered an older one that he'd thought was lost. "It might be my first logbook," he said slowly. "The one I started when Rick first began making me sleep in the car. I thought I'd left it under the seat, but when I looked for it later, it was gone. I had to start a new one." Maria and Daniel exchanged a look that Ethan had come to recognize, adult concern mixed with the calculation of how much to reveal to him. "Reynolds thinks Rick may have found it and hidden it," Daniel said carefully. "He believes that's why Rick escalated his behavior. He realized you were keeping records." A chill ran down Ethan's spine at the thought of Rick discovering his careful documentation, reading the honest assessments he'd written during those long, cold nights. No wonder Rick had become more controlling in the weeks before Ethan had finally confided in Ms. Mitchell. He'd known Ethan was creating evidence. "They want to use the notebook as evidence," Maria explained gently, "but they wanted to make sure it was okay with you first, since it contains your private thoughts." Ethan considered this. The idea of strangers, judges, lawyers, police officers, reading his most vulnerable moments made his stomach twist. But if it helped ensure Rick stayed in prison, wasn't that worth the discomfort? "Will I get it back eventually?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Once the case is closed, yes. All evidence is returned to its rightful owners, unless it's illegal or dangerous." Ethan straightened his shoulders, making a decision. "Then they can use it. I wrote it down so someone would know what was happening. I guess now they will." Maria's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You're the bravest person I know, Ethan Rodriguez." There was that word again. Brave. Ethan still wasn't sure it applied to him, but he was beginning to understand that maybe being brave didn't always look like cartoon superheroes or action movie stars. Maybe sometimes it just looked like a kid keeping careful records in a car back seat, hoping someone would eventually read them. After lunch, they said goodbye to Officer Wilson in the parking lot. The man crouched down to Ethan's eye level, his expression serious. "You did good today, Ethan. Actually, you've done good every day, surviving what you did. Don't ever forget that." Ethan nodded, suddenly shy. "Thank you for taking us to the planetarium, and for helping at the hearing." "Anytime," Daniel replied, and Ethan sensed he genuinely meant it. "And remember, my daughter Zoe is still hoping to get your expert advice on her lunar phases project." "I'll make her a diagram," Ethan promised, "like the one in my space notebook, but better." As they drove back to Greenfield, Ethan sat in the back seat of Aunt Lucia's car, a position that once represented exile, but now was simply a normal place to sit. Through the window, he watched Oakwood recede behind them, its familiar skyline shrinking in the distance. "Mom," he asked after they'd been driving for a while, "are we going to move back to Oakwood someday?" In the front passenger seat, Maria turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "Would you want to?" Ethan considered the question seriously. Oakwood held both his worst memories and some of his best. the planetarium, Ms. Mitchell, his friends at Pinecrest, the park where he'd learned to ride a bike. Greenfield was still new, still forming associations in his mind. It held safety and Aunt Lucia and the twins who had so matter-of-factly accepted his complicated history. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Maybe not right away, but someday, maybe. Once we're sure Rick is really gone for good." Maria nodded, understanding the layers beneath his words. "Then we'll keep it as a maybe someday plan. We have time to decide." Time. Such a simple concept, yet one that had been constricted and controlled for so long under Rick's dominion. Now it stretched before them, full of possibilities that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. By the time they reached Aunt Lucia's house, the emotional weight of the day had caught up with Ethan. Though it was barely 4:30 in the afternoon, he felt drained in a way that reminded him of the exhaustion that had plagued him during his nights in the car when staying alert for danger competed with his body's desperate need for rest. Rusty greeted them enthusiastically at the door, his whole body wiggling with delight as Ethan knelt to embrace him. The familiar smell of the dog's fur and the warmth of his solid presence was grounding in a way Ethan couldn't quite articulate. "I think someone could use a quiet evening," Lucia observed, noticing Ethan's drooping shoulders. "How about I make my famous hot chocolate and we watch that documentary about ocean creatures you liked last week?" The suggestion was perfectly calibrated to Ethan's current state, offering comfort without demands, company without pressure to interact. Before Rick, Ethan might have taken such thoughtfulness for granted. Now he recognized it as the gift it was. "Can Rusty sit on the couch with us?" he asked, already knowing the answer, but needing the reassurance of hearing it. "Of course," Lucia confirmed. "It's his couch, too." Later, as darkness fell outside and the TV quietly played footage of deep-sea creatures, Ethan found himself sandwiched between his mother and Rusty on the comfortable old sofa. Aunt Lucia had retreated to her home office to catch up on work emails, leaving them in peaceful semi-darkness, illuminated only by the television screen. "Mom," Ethan whispered, not wanting to break the tranquil atmosphere but needing to ask the question that had been circling in his mind since lunch. "Are you really not mad about your job, about having to leave Oakwood General?" Maria shifted to look at him, her expression soft in the blue glow from the TV. "Oh, Ethan. No, I'm not mad. Disappointed. Yes. It was a good job with good benefits. But there will be other jobs. There's only one you." "But you worked so hard to get that position. You were going to apply for the management training program." Maria sighed, stroking his hair gently. "Plans change, mijo. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity. The important thing is that we adapt and keep moving forward." Adapt. It was what Ethan had done in the car, creating systems for staying warm, for tracking time, for making the unbearable slightly more bearable. It was what his mother was doing, now building a new life from the wreckage Rick had left behind. "I'm sorry he ruined everything," Ethan said, his voice small. "Your job, our apartment, everything." "Not everything," Maria countered, pulling him closer. "We still have each other. We have Rusty. We have Aunt Lucia and our friends who helped us. We have all your knowledge about stars and planets that no one can ever take away." She pressed a kiss to the top of his head. "And now we have a future without fear. That's worth more than any job or apartment." Ethan wanted to believe her, but doubt still lingered. "But what if we can't afford our own place? What if your new job doesn't pay enough? What if the sun explodes tomorrow?" Maria interrupted gently. "What if aliens land in Greenfield? What if Rusty learns to talk?" She smiled at his skeptical look. "We can what-if ourselves into panic, Ethan. Believe me, I've done it many nights, but it doesn't help us move forward." "So what does?" Ethan asked, taking one day at a time, making the best decisions we can with what we know right now, trusting that we're strong enough to handle whatever comes next. Together. Together. It was a concept Ethan was relearning after months of isolation in the car, of carrying secrets too heavy for a child, of believing he had to protect his mother by hiding his suffering from her. "I kept a secret from you," he confessed suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could reconsider. "About Rick." Maria stiffened slightly beside him, but her voice remained calm. "What secret, mijo?" "The night you had to work a double shift. Because Elena was sick. Rick locked me out like usual, but he forgot to leave the car keys. It was really cold, like 18 degrees according to the bank sign near our apartment. Rusty and I had to hide in the laundry room in the basement. Mrs. Petrovich from 2B found us there in the morning when she came to do her laundry." Maria's arm tightened around him, and he could feel the rapid rise and fall of her chest as she controlled her reaction. "What happened then?" "She wanted to call you or the police, but I begged her not to. I told her we got locked out by accident and we were fine. I was worried about what Rick would do if he found out someone knew." Ethan hesitated, then added, "She gave me a blanket and some crackers, and she let us stay in her apartment until I saw Rick leave for work. She made me promise to tell you, but I never did." The memory still carried the sharp edge of fear. Huddling in the basement laundry room, Rusty's body heat the only thing keeping him from dangerous hypothermia, the kindness of the elderly neighbor tempered by his terror of Rick's potential retaliation. Maria was quiet for so long that Ethan began to worry she was angry. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. So deeply sorry that you were in that situation, that you felt you couldn't tell me, that you had to rely on the kindness of neighbors instead of your own mother's protection." "It wasn't your fault," Ethan insisted. "Rick was the one who did it, not you. But I brought him into our lives. I missed the signs. I believed him when he said you were just being difficult or disrespectful." Her voice broke. "I failed you." Ethan sat up, turning to face his mother with unexpected fierceness. "No, Rick failed. Rick lied. Rick hurt us." He used the man's name deliberately, refusing to call him a stepfather or anything that implied legitimate authority. "You got us away from him as soon as you knew what was happening. That's what matters." Maria looked at him with a mixture of surprise and pride, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "When did you get so wise, Ethan Rodriguez?" He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Miss Mitchell says sometimes the hardest lessons teach us the most. I think maybe that's true." Maria pulled him back into a hug, and they sat in silence. For a while, the documentary continuing its quiet narration about ocean ecosystems. Ethan felt the knot of anxiety that had lived in his chest for so long begin to loosen slightly. The confession about Mrs. Petrovich somehow releasing a pressure valve he hadn't realized was still in place. There would be more difficult conversations in the days ahead. More revelations about Rick's crimes, more decisions about their future, more therapy sessions working through the trauma of those freezing nights. But for now, in this moment, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Safety, not just physical, but emotional. The freedom to speak his truth without calculating the consequences. The luxury of being a child protected by adults, rather than a child protecting adults from painful realities. As he began to drift off to sleep, lulled by the gentle drone of the TV and his mother's steady presence beside him, Ethan found himself thinking about the constellations, how ancient people had looked up at random stars scattered across the night sky and found patterns, stories, meaning. Maybe that's what he was doing now, taking the scattered, painful moments of the past months and beginning to form them into a constellation that made sense, a story he could understand and eventually share. Not just a record of temperatures and times like his notebooks from the car, but a larger narrative about survival, resilience, and the possibility of healing. His last conscious thought before sleep claimed him was about the Mars rover they'd seen at the planetarium, a machine designed to explore a harsh, unforgiving landscape, transmitting knowledge back across the vast darkness. Perhaps that's what his notebooks had been all along, transmissions from a hostile environment, sending out data in the hope that someone, somewhere, would receive the signal and understand. Someone had. Ms. Mitchell had understood, Officer Wilson had understood, his mother now understood, and slowly Ethan himself was beginning to understand that surviving was not the same as being broken, that documentation was not the same as defeat. In that understanding lay the seeds of a future where sleeping in cars and recording temperatures and hiding from volatile adults were stories to be told rather than realities to be endured. A future where Ethan Rodriguez could simply be a boy who liked stars and science and his dog, not a survivor perpetually braced for the next crisis. It wasn't a future he could fully imagine yet, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, he believed it might be possible. 6 months later, on a warm August afternoon, Ethan Rodriguez stood in the center of a small but bright apartment, watching as movers carried in the last of their furniture. The two-bedroom unit in a modest complex on the outskirts of Oakwood was nothing fancy. Standard beige walls, slightly worn carpet, kitchen appliances that had seen better days, but to Ethan, it represented something monumental. A fresh start. After much discussion, deliberation, and several therapy sessions, Maria had decided that returning to Oakwood was the right choice for them. Not to erase the past or pretend it hadn't happened, but to reclaim the city that had been their home before Rick had tainted it with fear and isolation. Greenfield had been a necessary sanctuary during their most vulnerable time, but Oakwood held their community, their support system, and ultimately, their future. "What do you think, Mijo?" Maria asked, coming to stand beside him in the empty living room. "Should we put the sofa against this wall or that one?" Ethan considered the question with the same methodical attention he gave to all spatial problems. "That wall," he decided, pointing. "Then we can see out the window, and Rusty can look outside from the cushions." As if hearing his name, the old beagle trotted in from exploring the kitchen, nails clicking on the linoleum before hitting carpet. He'd grown plumper over the past months, his once dull coat now glossy from proper nutrition and care. Like Ethan and Maria, the physical markers of neglect had faded, though invisible scars remained. "That's a very fair concern," Daniel said finally. "People can hide who they really are, sometimes for a long time. Rick fooled a lot of people, including trained professionals." He set down the screwdriver completely, giving Ethan his undivided attention. "I can't prove to you who I am through words. Only time and consistent actions can do that. What I can tell you is that I understand why you'd be cautious, and I respect that caution." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was an honest one. Ethan appreciated that Daniel hadn't tried to convince him with grand promises or emotional appeals. "Mom smiles more when you're around," Ethan admitted. "Not her fake smile that she used with Rick, her real one." Daniel's expression softened. "That's good to hear. Your mom deserves all the real smiles in the world after what she's been through." He picked up the screwdriver again, returning to the bookshelf assembly. "For what it's worth, I think you're an exceptional kid, Ethan. Not just smart, but brave, and perceptive and kind. Any man would be lucky to have you as part of his life, regardless of any relationship with your mom." The compliment settled warmly in Ethan's chest, but he maintained his analytical reserve. "I'm going to keep watching," he warned, "just to be sure." "I'd expect nothing less from such a thorough scientist," Daniel replied seriously, but with a small smile. "Observation is the foundation of good research." Later that evening, after Daniel had left and the movers had finished, Ethan sat cross-legged on his new bed, sorting through the box of books he'd designated as highest priority for unpacking. Most were astronomy texts, field guides to rocks and minerals, and science fiction novels that Ms. Mitchell had recommended during their weekly video chats over the summer. Maria appeared in the doorway, carrying a mug of hot chocolate topped with the mini marshmallows that had become their evening ritual. A simple pleasure that Rick had deemed wasteful, but that they now indulged in without guilt. "Making progress?" she asked, setting the mug on Ethan's nightstand. "Almost done," he replied, holding up a battered copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that Daniel had lent him the previous month. "I just need to finish this before I return it." Maria sat on the edge of the bed, watching as Ethan carefully arranged the books on his newly assembled bookshelf. "I heard you and Daniel having a pretty serious conversation earlier." Ethan froze momentarily, then continued shelving. "You did?" These walls are a bit thinner than the ones at Aunt Lucia's." "Are you mad?" Maria shook her head. "No, mijo, I'm not mad. I'm actually glad you felt comfortable enough to ask him directly instead of worrying about it silently." Ethan placed the last book on the shelf before turning to face his mother. "Are you and Officer Wilson dating?" Maria's smile was gentle but slightly sad. "Not exactly. But we've been talking about the possibility of spending more time together in a way that's different from friendship." "Do you want to date him?" "Part of me does," she admitted. "Daniel is a good man who has shown us nothing but respect and kindness. But another part of me is still scared of trusting my judgment after Rick." She reached out to take Ethan's hand. "And the most important part of me wants to make sure that whatever decisions I make, they're good for you too." "I wouldn't mind," Ethan said carefully, testing the truth of his own words as he spoke them. "Not if it makes you happy, and not if he stays the same as he is now." Relief and emotion flickered across Maria's face. "Thank you for saying that, but there's no rush, you know. We're still figuring out this new life, this new home. Dating isn't at the top of my priority list right now." "What is?" Ethan asked. "You," she said simply. "Making sure you have everything you need to feel safe and happy, helping you adjust to transferring back to Pinecrest for 5th grade, building a stable home where you never have to be afraid." The certainty in her voice confirmed what Ethan had gradually come to understand over the past 6 months, that his mother's focus on him wasn't born from guilt over what had happened with Rick, but from genuine love and commitment to his well-being. "I'm not afraid anymore," he told her. It wasn't entirely true. He still had nightmares about the car, still flinched at sudden loud noises, still kept emergency supplies in his backpack, but the constant grinding fear that had been his companion for so long had diminished to manageable proportions. Maria seemed to understand the nuance in his statement. "I'm glad, and if the fear comes back sometimes, that's okay too. We'll handle it together." Together. The word had become something of a mantra between them, a reminder that the isolation Rick had enforced, keeping Ethan in the car, keeping Maria working endless shifts, keeping them from communicating honestly with each other, was permanently broken. "Do you think we'll be okay here?" Ethan asked, gesturing around the new apartment. "Even though it's back in Oakwood?" Maria considered the question thoughtfully. "I think we will. This place is ours, just ours. No ghosts, no bad memories. And we're different people now than we were when Rick came into our lives, stronger, wiser." She smiled slightly, more suspicious too, which isn't always a bad thing. Ethan nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The trust they'd once given freely had been tempered by experience into something more cautious, more discerning. Rick had taken much from them, but he'd also inadvertently taught them the value of healthy skepticism. "I'm going to put my star. Charts up tomorrow," Ethan said, changing the subject to more concrete plans, and set up my telescope by the window. Sounds perfect, Maria agreed, recognizing his need to shift to safer topics. And I thought we could go to the farmer's market on Saturday morning before the housewarming party, pick up some fresh fruit for the punch. The simple domesticity of the conversation, planning decorations, shopping for a party, felt both ordinary and extraordinary. These were the normal parent-child interactions that had been impossible under Rick's control, when every decision was scrutinized, every expense questioned, every joy somehow diminished. As Maria left to continue unpacking kitchen boxes, Ethan moved to the window and looked out at the unfamiliar view. Their apartment was on the second floor, offering a partial view of a small community park across the street. Not the expansive night sky he'd studied from the car windows, but a different kind of openness. Children playing on swings, elderly couples walking dogs, teenagers shooting baskets on a small court. Life, ordinary life, happening without fear or secrecy. His reflection showed a boy who had changed in subtle ways over the past 6 months. He'd grown an inch taller, his hair now cut regularly rather than haphazardly trimmed by his mother. Between shifts, fell neatly across his forehead. The perpetual dark circles beneath his eyes had faded. He looked, for the most part, like any other 10-year-old boy. Only his eyes revealed the difference, a watchfulness, a depth of understanding that set him apart from his peers. Not the haunted wariness of his car days, but something more complex, wisdom earned through hardship, perspective gained through survival. Dr. Collins had told him once that trauma changes the brain, creates new neural pathways, alters how we see the world. But that doesn't have to be entirely negative, she'd added. Some survivors develop extraordinary empathy, remarkable resilience, deeper appreciation for simple joys. The challenge is to honor what you've learned through suffering without letting it define your entire future. Ethan was still working on that balance, acknowledging the lasting impact of those freezing nights while refusing to let them determine his destiny. Some days it felt impossible. Other days, like today, he could glimpse the possibility of a future where the car was simply a chapter in his story, not its defining feature. A knock on the apartment door interrupted his thoughts. Ethan heard his mother answer it, followed by the familiar voice of Ms. Mitchell, who had promised to stop by with some housewarming gifts after school. "Ethan," Maria called, "look who's here a few days early." He hurried to the living room, where Sarah Mitchell stood with a large gift bag and a broader smile than he'd seen on her face in all the time he'd known her. She'd cut her hair since he'd last seen her, the shorter style giving her a more youthful appearance. "Miss Mitchell!" he exclaimed, genuinely pleased to see his former teacher. Despite his transfer to Greenfield Elementary, they'd maintained regular contact through video calls and occasional visits. She'd even driven to Greenfield twice to attend his science fair exhibitions. "Hello, Ethan," she greeted him warmly. "I know I wasn't supposed to come until the weekend, but I couldn't wait to see your new place and to share some news." "What news?" he asked, curious about the excitement evident in her normally composed demeanor. Ms. Mitchell glanced at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. "I've been reassigned for the coming school year," she announced. "I'll be teaching 5th grade instead of 4th, which means if you want, I could be your teacher again when you transfer back to Pinecrest." The implication took a moment to register. "You'd be my teacher again, for real?" "Only if you want," Ms. Mitchell clarified. "Principal Hayes said we could place you in Mrs. Abernathy's class instead if you'd prefer a fresh start." "No," Ethan said quickly, then moderated his tone. "I mean, I'd like to be in your class, if that's okay." The prospect of returning to Pinecrest had been both exciting and anxiety-inducing. Exciting because it meant reconnecting with his old friends and the educational environment he'd always thrived in. Anxiety-inducing because it meant facing classmates who might have heard about his situation. navigating the building where his breakdown in Ms. Mitchell's classroom had initiated the cascade of events leading to Rick's arrest. Having Ms. Mitchell as his teacher again would provide a crucial element of stability amidst the transition. "It's very okay," she assured him with a smile. "In fact, I may have requested the reassignment specifically for that reason, though you didn't hear that from me." Maria laughed. "Your secret's safe with us." She gestured toward the kitchen. "Would you like some coffee, or we have lemonade?" As the adults moved to the kitchen, Ethan followed more slowly, struck by the realization that his support network had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined during those isolated nights in the car. Back then, it had been just him, and Rusty huddled against the cold, with his mother an unwitting absence and every other adult a potential threat. Now his world included Ms. Mitchell, who had noticed his exhaustion and asked the questions that ultimately led to safety. Officer Wilson, who had treated Ethan's evidence with respect and had gradually become something approaching a friend. Dr. Collins, who helped him understand that his hypervigilance and meticulous record-keeping were both survival skills and transferable strengths. The twins from Greenfield, who had offered matter-of-fact acceptance rather than pity. Principal Hayes, Aunt Lucia, the social workers and advocates who had guided them through the legal proceedings. People who had seen him not just as a victim, to be rescued, but as a person with agency, intelligence, and inherent value. People who had helped him begin the transition from surviving to living. Later that night, after Ms. Mitchell had left and Maria had finally declared an end to unpacking for the day, Ethan lay in his new bed beneath the glow-in-the-dark constellations. Rusty was curled at his feet, snoring softly, the dog's presence a constant comfort. Through the partly open window came the ambient sounds of the apartment complex, distant conversations, a car door closing, music playing softly from someone's patio, normal sounds, safe sounds, so different from the eerie silence of the parking lot at Meadowbrook Apartments, broken only by occasional footsteps that made him duck down in fear it might be Rick checking if he'd sneak back inside. Ethan reached for the small notebook he kept on his nightstand, not a temperature log or survival journal now, but a record of questions for his therapy sessions, observations about his new environment, ideas for science projects. Dr. Collins had suggested he continue documenting his experiences, but with a focus on growth and future possibilities, rather than mere survival. Tonight, he wrote, "First night in new apartment. Strange sounds, but not scary. Mom seems happy. Ms. Mitchell will be my teacher again. Science fair project with Zoe moving forward. Questions for Dr. C. 1. Normal to still check locks? 2. How to? Know who to trust? 3. Will we ever be just regular people again?" The last question had been circling in his mind for months. Would there ever be a time when he wasn't the kid who slept in the car? When his mother wasn't the nurse whose husband locked out her son? When their story wasn't defined by its worst chapter? Closing the notebook, Ethan switched off his bedside lamp and watched as the phosphorescent stars on his ceiling gradually became visible in the darkness. Daniel and Zoe had helped him arrange them in perfect replicas of the actual constellations, Orion, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, all in their proper positions, unlike the random, disorderly stars he'd observed through the car window night after night. These stars formed recognizable patterns, told coherent stories. That transformation, from chaos to meaning, from isolation to connection, felt significant in ways he couldn't fully articulate. As he drifted towards sleep, Ethan found comfort in the knowledge that his own story, like the constellations above him, was being rewritten, not erased or denied, but reconfigured into something that made sense, something he could share without shame, something that connected him to others rather than separating him. He wasn't just the boy who had survived freezing nights in a car. He was Ethan Rodriguez, fifth grader, amateur astronomer, rock collector, dog owner, friend to the twins and to Zoe, son of Maria, student of Ms. Mitchell, mentee of Officer Wilson, impatient of Dr. Collins. A whole person, complex and evolving, whose future contained possibilities beyond mere survival. That night, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan slept through until morning without waking to check the temperature, without startling at unfamiliar sounds, without the weight of constant vigilance. When sunlight streamed through his eastern window, painting warm patterns across his blue walls, he woke to find Rusty still curled at his feet and his mother standing in the doorway with a mug of coffee, watching him with the expression of quiet joy. "Good morning," she said softly. "Welcome home." Ethan stretched, feeling the unfamiliar but welcome sensation of deep, restful sleep in his muscles. "Morning," he replied, then added with certainty, "It's going to be a good day." And for perhaps the first time since he could remember, he truly believed it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. "Good thinking," Maria agreed, making a note on the small pad she carried, always considering Rusty's preferences. Ethan knelt to scratch behind the dog's ears. He's getting older. He needs to be comfortable. The observation was innocent enough, but Maria caught the subtext: Ethan's heightened awareness of comfort and safety, his ongoing commitment to protecting the vulnerable. It was one of many ways the trauma of those nights in the car continued to manifest, despite the significant progress he'd made in therapy. "You're a good dog parent," she said simply, not drawing attention to the deeper meaning. Dr. Collins had emphasized the importance of acknowledging Ethan's caregiving instincts without pathologizing them. "Why don't we go check out your room? The movers should be bringing your desk soon." Ethan's new bedroom was smaller than the one at Aunt Lucia's house, but larger than his room at the old apartment. The walls were painted a soft blue. Maria had insisted the landlord allow them to customize this one aspect of the rental, and the ceiling sported a collection of glow-in-the-dark stars arranged in accurate constellations. Officer Wilson and his daughter Zoe had helped install them the previous weekend, Zoe reading off star coordinates from an astronomy book while her father and Ethan carefully positioned each adhesive star. The project had taken hours, interrupted by pizza breaks and Zoe's endless questions about space, but the result was worth it. A miniature night sky that transformed Ethan's ceiling into a sanctuary of familiar patterns. "Mom," Ethan said, as they surveyed the room, "when will Ms. Mitchell come to see our new place?" "She's planning to visit this weekend," Maria replied, straightening the curtains on the window that faced east, Ethan's specific request so he could observe the sunrise. "She's helping us with the housewarming party, remember?" The housewarming had been Dr. Collins's idea, a concrete way to mark their new beginning and to reclaim the concept of home as a place of safety rather than danger. The guest list was small but significant. Ms. Mitchell and Principal Hayes from Pinecrest, Officer Wilson and his family, Dr. Collins, Aunt Lucia, and a few of Maria's new colleagues from Oakwood Memorial Hospital, where she'd recently been hired as a pediatric nurse. "Will Maya and Miguel come too?" Ethan asked, referring to the twins from Greenfield Elementary, who had become his first real friends after years of careful isolation under Rick's regime. "Their mother said they'll try. It's a bit of a drive from Greenfield, but they want to see your new place." Ethan nodded, pleased. The twins had been instrumental in his gradual return to something resembling normal childhood social interactions. Their matter-of-fact acceptance of his complicated history had made it easier to navigate the inevitable questions from other children, while their persistent inclusion of him in activities had slowly rebuilt his trust in peer relationships. A knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. "That's probably Daniel with the bookshelf," Maria said, heading toward the sound. "He texted that he was on his way." Ethan followed, Rusty at his heels. Over the past 6 months, Officer Wilson had transitioned from a professional contact to something approaching family friend. His daughter Zoe, a year younger than Ethan, but equally passionate about science, had initially connected with Ethan over the Lunar Phases project. That tentative academic collaboration had evolved into regular planetarium visits, backyard telescope sessions, and eventually a genuine friendship that benefited both children. Daniel stood in the doorway with a partially disassembled bookshelf balanced awkwardly in his arms. He wore civilian clothes, jeans and a faded t-shirt with a NASA logo, as he typically did during these non-official interactions. "Special delivery," he announced with a grin. "One bookshelf as promised." The movers took one look at all those parts and suggested I handle it myself. Maria laughed, stepping back to let him enter. "Thank you for bringing it, and for volunteering. To reassemble it, my furniture building skills are limited to those little Allen wrenches that come with IKEA products." "Mom broke our TV stand trying to put it together," Ethan informed Daniel solemnly. "The drawer part fell off when you opened it." "Traitor!" Maria teased, ruffling Ethan's hair. "I thought we agreed that was our secret." The easy banter, the casual physical affection. These were things that had slowly returned to their relationship as the shadow of Rick's influence receded. In the immediate aftermath of their escape, Ethan had flinched at unexpected touches, had carefully monitored his words for anything that might cause trouble. Now, 6 months and many therapy sessions later, those reflexive defenses were gradually giving way to a tentative trust in safety. "Where do you want this masterpiece of modern engineering?" Daniel asked, nodding toward the bookshelf parts. "My room," Ethan replied immediately, "for my space books and rock collection." "Lead the way, Professor," Daniel said, following Ethan down the short hallway. As Daniel laid out the bookshelf pieces on Ethan's bedroom floor, he whistled appreciatively. "At the star-adorned ceiling. You and Zoe did an amazing job with this. It looks even better in daylight." Ethan glanced up at his artificial night sky. "We made sure to get the magnitudes right. The brighter stars have the bigger stickers." "Attention to detail," Daniel nodded approvingly. "That's what makes a good scientist." The phrase echoed what Ethan's therapist had helped him understand over the past months, that the same observational skills and meticulous documentation that had helped him survive his nights in the car were valuable strengths, not just trauma responses. Dr. Collins had encouraged him to channel those abilities into science projects, creative endeavors, and other positive outlets. "Are you and Zoe still entering the regional science fair?" Ethan asked, helping Daniel sort screws by size. "Absolutely. She's determined to win with that solar system model you helped her design. Between you and me," Daniel lowered his voice, "conspiratorially, her mother and I have sawdust in places we didn't know existed from all that woodworking in the garage." Ethan smiled, genuinely pleased by the thought of Zoe working on their project. He'd designed the mathematical scale for the model, ensuring that the planetary sizes and orbital distances were accurately proportioned, a task that had occupied him for days and had prompted Maria to purchase a scientific calculator for his 10th birthday in June. As they worked together assembling the bookshelf, Ethan found himself studying Daniel with careful sidelong glances. The officer had become a steady presence in their lives, his initial professional involvement evolving into something more personal. He often brought science books he thought Ethan might enjoy, volunteered as a chaperone for school field trips, and occasionally joined them for dinner, sometimes with Zoe and sometimes alone. Ethan had observed the subtle changes in his mother when Daniel was around, how she laughed more easily, how her perpetual vigilance seemed to relax slightly, how she'd started wearing the colorful earrings that Rick had dismissed as tacky, but that Daniel had once casually complimented. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said suddenly, holding a shelf steady as Daniel secured it with screws. "Fire away." "Are you and my mom dating?" Daniel's screwdriver slipped, narrowly missing his finger. He set the tool down carefully, giving Ethan his full attention. "That's a pretty direct question. What makes you ask?" Ethan shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite the importance of the answer. "You come over a lot, and sometimes you look at her the way Mr. Rivera looks at Mrs. Rivera when they think the students aren't watching." His fourth-grade teacher at Greenfield Elementary and his wife had become Ethan's reluctant model for healthy adult relationships. Daniel's expression was thoughtful, neither dismissing the observation nor reacting defensively. "Your mom and I've become friends, good friends, over these past months. And yes, I care about her a great deal. But we've both been very careful about keeping appropriate boundaries because of how we met and because of everything you and she have been through. But you do like her, not just as a friend." A slight smile crossed Daniel's face. "I do, very much. But even more importantly, I respect her and you, which means that nothing would ever happen without your mom being completely ready and without you being comfortable with it too." Ethan considered this, turning a small screw between his fingers. Rick pretended to be nice at first too. Mom said he was charming until they got married. The implied question hung in the air between them, heavy with Ethan's hard-earned skepticism about adult intentions. Daniel didn't immediately jump to defend himself or dismiss the concern, which Ethan noted as a point in his favor.